It's now my incredible honour to introduce our next speaker. Savenaca Narube is the leader of the Unity Fiji Party. He's also the former governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, and I learned over dinner last night, studied econometrics in Sydney a long, long time ago. So please join me in welcome Savenaca.
Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I want to show my respect to the Ngunnawal people as traditional owners of this site. I have heard so much today. Excellent speeches by those that have preceded me. So I hope I can keep up with that. But I think Her Excellency Ilana introduced this very important topic for the Pacific, which is the Pacific family. I'm going to elaborate on that. In the indigenous Fijian language, the family is called the Vuvale. And as you know, trust is the foundation of a good Vuvale. And trust is earned when you deliver what you said you would deliver. So I thought that this trust would be very appropriate in this presentation today. I thank, of course, the Institute, Richard, of course, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. I thank the research that you do. Impressive, independent. Thank you for the advocacy and the outreach. And I've borrowed a few for my papers or my speech today. I thought, as you may have perhaps know, there are a few pillars here that we are dealing with. And climate change is in it. But there are broader issues that I've heard this morning on the economic development of it, the priorities of development, and then the resources that are needed for that. And inside that is climate change financing. But it's encompassed by who? Politicians. And the geopolitics of it that makes us go forward or sideways. So I will start with that. I'll start with the bigger picture of economic development. We know what the challenges of the Pacific on economic development. Small geographical sizes, remoteness, small natural endowment, and very limited capacity. But in my personal experience, and have traveled everywhere in the Pacific, we still have opportunities for that, to grow the livelihoods of people. But we fail miserably to grab these opportunities in the Pacific. Instead, we point a finger and blame others for shortcoming. I'm new to politics. I've taken Polly's advice. Courageous enough to jump into it. But I've quickly learned a few things. One of that is politicians have made an art of pointing fingers, blaming others. Our major challenges in Fiji are on the board. What are they? And these are similar to some other Pacific countries. They are first, self-serving politicians. Two, poor prioritizations of the use of scarce resources. And lastly, the deterioration of good governance, the rise in corruption. And this combination, of course, has led to many of our problems. These are ingrown problems. They don't come from offshore. We create them. Of poor management, financial management, debt distress, low growth, widening income disparity, and rising poverty. So we must firstly, in the Pacific, spend our resources rightly. So in the invitation for me to speak here today, the Australia Institute, Richard himself said they like my media article in Fiji of the recent COP29 in Baku. In that article, I was scathing in my criticism of the size of the Fiji contingent to the conference. There were 100 people wearing the Fiji badges in Baku. The question that I silently asked was, why would donors such as Australia agree to fund such excessive delegations? Is it a reward for good family behavior? Even regional organizations, I know them because I've worked in them, are jumping on the gravy train. So I wish that donors would set clear conditions to prevent countries such as Fiji and from wasting their money. Secondly, our Prime Minister in Fiji has just recently bloated his cabinet from 25 to now 35. It's the largest cabinet in the world per capita basis. It's only one backbencher, and that's and it's not by choice because she was sacked from his So when the Prime Minister was asked, are you concerned about the cost of your expansion to the cabinet? He said, reportedly said, no, I'm not worried about the cost. And this cost was additional to the huge increase that parliamentarians paid themselves 6 months into their term and raised their allowances as well. So to me, a parliament that decides how much to pay themselves is unethical and perhaps illegal. This is the self-serving prioritization that I was mentioning. So I'd really like to see a review of the modality of Australia's general budget support. I think while the recipients should continue to enjoy some flexibility on how they spend the general budget support, Australia, I think, should tighten the policy triggers to ensure that your money is spent wisely. The last challenge I mentioned was corruption, and this is rising rapidly in Fiji. As you may know, some of you may know, the former Prime Minister has completed his first jail term. First. His other cases and those of his former Attorney General are currently going through the courts. I understand there are several more to follow. The corruption of a minister in this current government is also in court. This level of corruption has never been seen before in Fiji. Corruption, as you know, is an evil that destroys incentives and increases the poverty of our people. So I hope that Australia will direct more help to these areas. Now I come to the Wuwale. We have heard political statements on both sides of the ocean. Okay? I love these two that are on the board. Okay? Polly, I think, has mentioned the first one by the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And this was underlined by the Prime Minister, lifting it from the regional Pacific to the global stage. So having read this and heard these undertakings, you may be interested to know how the Pacific family members regard Australia. And that's my role today. Because I'm from the Pacific. And I must say, outside the diplomatic circuit, I'm afraid the views are not very complimentary. Okay? These sentiments are best summed up in one word, and I think that has been the theme of the discussion so far. What's that word? Credibility. Credibility. But let's look at the numbers. Okay? Australia has allocated $2 billion, Australian dollars, to the Pacific. But I've put there the proper perspective on that number. The IMF study on unlocking access to climate finance for Pacific Island countries estimated that the annual cost, I underline annual, of climate adaptation for Pacific Island countries is between 6.5 to 9% of their GDP, some even going beyond to 10%. So you will imagine, as you know, the unmet climate financing gap in the Pacific is huge. 2, Australia's global ODA is only 0.19% of its GNI. It should be benchmarking 0.7%. And of more concern, I understand that Australia's ODA has been declining and is projected to continue to do so. 3, it is unclear whether the $2 billion assistance to the Pacific include military and security assistance. Transparency in development assistance is not one of Australia's strengths, as it was ranked 48 out of 50 of the Transparency of Development Assistance according to the 2024 Aid Transparency Index. 4, as we have heard today, Australia's fuel subsidy of $11 billion is 5 times more than what Australia gave to the Pacific last year. 5, the allocation to the Pacific is less than $2.6 billion that Australia is spending on nuclear submarines. Australia has joined the developed countries that have used the ocean of peace as their nuclear playground. 6, Australia has pledged a token $50 million only to the Loss and Damage Fund, something very, very important to the Pacific. And lastly, carbon trading or offsetting that you have heard today. That's what Australia is saying. You have seen what it does. So when you combine these two together, and that's the theme of my presentation, Australia's actions clearly do not match its words. So if Australia wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Pacific Islands, members of the family, as the government has promised, it must close its credibility gap. We've heard so much about the fuel subsidy strategy. I think your, Australia's, reputation hinges on what you do on its fossil fuel strategy. And despite all the research and international local pressures, Australia is slow in action to reduce its emission. So if we limit, I'm an economist by training and also by career, if you remove everything else, the political noise around it, and just focus on the economic logic of this policy, the net benefit of the fuel subsidy appears negligent. Even from the Australian perspective, the subsidy makes little economic sense. Let me go to the priorities that Australia gives to the Pacific, and this is on Fiji. The Australian Day advertisement in Fiji's main daily newspaper 2 weeks ago covered many areas of Australian assistance to Fiji. It was an impressive one, colorful, advertisement. But in that advertisement, there was no mention whatsoever of Australian assistance to the Fiji military. Some of this assistance to the Fiji military is wrapped in labels such as disaster preparedness. And that's a statement that is up there by the Australian Defence after they complete the redevelopment of our military camp in Fiji. It stated that it will strengthen Fiji's security. Is Fiji under threat from the invasion of our Polynesian neighbor? Absolutely not. And one of the Australian assistants to the military made the headlines in Fiji last year. Australia donated a brand new Navy boat which ran aground on a reef. There it is, on the reef. In its first voyage. And this was not Australia's fault, let me clarify. And in my honest to God opinion, most of the Pacific countries do not need a military. Fiji itself would have doubled its GDP by now if it hadn't had those 3 coups. The question that I posed, why is Australia building capacity in an institution that has trampled on democracy and damaged people's lives? We are not facing a military threat. We are facing a climate threat. We are facing a drug threat. And we are facing a corruption threat. It would make sense if Australia built capacity in our police force to fight drugs. It makes sense to strengthen the Fiji Independent Commission against corruption, to fight corruption. But it chose to do that to the military. The other issue that I would like to discuss is what I call BDF, the Boomerang donor flows, which is the assistance, as you know, that flows by Australia to the Pacific that flows back to Australia. Up to now, the issue has been confined to the side discussions, but it is an issue that may rebalance the delivery of development assistance. And I suggest we take this into the formal negotiations. I'm sure we will be able to find an acceptable methodology of measuring the BDF. Perhaps the Australia Institute can guide us in that. Yes. I must say, the results may astound many people. Let me just list down 3 issues here. Research has found that the palm workers from Fiji will potentially pay $52 million in tax to the Australian government. And this almost covers the $54 million in bilateral development assistance Australia has allocated to Fiji. Number 2, the consultancy components of development projects are huge. The money for consultancies under Australian development assistance largely flows back to Australia. I know this. Why? Because I own a consultancy management company out of Suva. Number 3, tied assistance. There are strings attached to development assistance. Some are explicit, the others are not. They add to this. So it won't surprise me if after computing this BDF, Australia becomes what I call net recipient of assistance from the Pacific Islands. That would be fun. So, Abu Wale, born out of political rhetorics, will always be fragile. So the Pacific Vuvale was destined to be under threat from its inception. climate change could be the straw that breaks the back of our fragile family. The climate rift, as we have heard today, between the family members cannot be any wider in this family. And the imbalance is huge. To correct the imbalance, there's no other choice except to Australia to reduce its emission by more than the official 43%. The question I ask, is this expectation realistic? Only Australia can answer that. Australia knows the situation. The government knows its emission target is inconsistent with the Paris Agreement. Based on what we have witnessed so far, should the Pacific hold its breath for Australia to change that? Should we hold our breath? I think we may run out of breath, as it appears unlikely from what I have heard today that Australia will change tack in the foreseeable future. So why do I do that? I say that first, Australia has clearly signaled its intentions to continue to approve coal projects that will emit millions of tons of carbon dioxide to the family's atmosphere. And Australia has no intention of reducing or removing its fossil subsidy in the near future. And third, Australia consistently attempts to water down climate-related international agreements and statements. And I don't see that changing. And lastly, Australia uses international emissions accounting to meet its climate targets. This, I don't see it changing. The Pacific itself is not doing enough to remind the world of the Prime Minister's promise of its climate leadership in the region and the world, perhaps from the fear of losing the Aussie dollars that they are getting now. To echo the words of our Minister for Finance on his return from COP29, something is better than nothing. So are the Pacific Islands left with trying to hold on to that something? Tragically, that is not enough, and time is not on our side. So what can we do? I think, in my view, to prevent this internal collapse of this family Vuvale, I suggest, if possible, if we refocus the family dialogue. Perhaps it's possible not to point fingers at each other. I don't know. But perhaps answer this question: how can the members of the Vuvale work together to build a more competitive Pacific region in the 21st century? Climate, of course, will be the centerpiece of this strategy. There may be economic and trade opportunities opening up into the future. So we'll take advantage of that if we are ahead of the game compared to the world. So we remain competitive when world demand for fossil fuel declines. We better clearly identify islands, the role of islands in this strategy. Let me turn to COP31. It was mentioned before. I think both opposing sides have already established their positions on Australia's bid to host COP31. The yes camp sees it as an opportunity for the Pacific to showcase their climate issues. The no camp points to the poor climate credibility of the primary host. In my judgment, I think it will be a great achievement to pull the COP31 to our part of the world. I heard last night that COP meetings have never had in the Southern Hemisphere. I was incredible to hear that. But as we discuss the logistics of COP31, I would love to see the following prerequisites. One, I endorse the Pacific Elders' voice that Australia must demonstrate a clear policy shift towards a reduction of emissions that are more aligned to the Paris Declaration. Two, the Pacific co-host must not be relegated to side events. Three, our climate challenges must be given the attention that they deserve. That's a wonderful opportunity for us. And lastly, the Pacific Island leaders and the Pacific people must be given prominence throughout the event. Let me end on the geopolitical strategy. The Pacific Island countries are fast catching on to the geopolitical game. China, as you know, I don't see anybody from the Chinese embassy here, has taken a very aggressive stance to find favors across the Pacific. And you know what? It's working. From PNG to the small islands like Tuvalu, the presence of China is growing. I do not think that anyone should blame the Pacific Islands from playing China against the traditional donors like United States and Australia. As a rule, competition grows the economic and financial cake. I think the approaches of the two groups of donors, our traditional and China, are very distinct. The processes adopted by traditional donors take a long time. I know it. I was in the Ministry of Finance, and their focus tends to be very wide. China, on the other hand, cherry picks. It concentrates on building roads, bridges, and hospitals, which not only immediately cater for the people's basic needs, but also provide visible icons of assistance when they have left. So I would like to see a re-engineering of the structure and processes of assistance of donors like Australia to effectively compete with the increasing presence of China in the region. So where to from here of the Wu Valley? Many in the Pacific, including myself, still wish to maintain and build on our historical relationship with Australia and New Zealand. We go back a long way. We are familiar with each other. We would like our traditional donors, at least from my perspective, to remain as our main development partners in years to come. But, as you all heard today, for it to work, we must adjust the huge imbalance in this family relationship. I wish that Australia accords a higher priority to its family members. I wish that Australia would give more weight to the interests of its family members. I wish that Australia would reduce its fuel subsidy so it can give more assistance to the family. And I wish that we can work together to strengthen the global competitiveness of the region in the future. That is a heavy wish list. So I better stop here before I'm accused of being a wishful thinker rather than a realist. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching, and a very special thank you to all our supporters who help keep us running. We're not funded by political parties or fossil fuel companies or government, but by people like you who know the importance of evidence-based research in shaping the critical decisions facing Australia. If you'd like to support us to continue exposing inconvenient truths, challenging vested interests, and explaining the big issues in plain English, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution today. Visit our website australiainstitute.org.au to find out more.